Hey guys, welcome back. So today we're going to discuss the basic mechanics of a high bar back squat.
Another how to squat video? What is this, 2016?
This is not necessarily going to be a tutorial video on how to squat, but rather this content is geared more towards someone who's already been squatting for at least a number of months, or they've attempted to squat before, or maybe they gave up on squatting. They watched a video saying that squatting was bad or dangerous. So this is for someone who's already squatting, generally speaking, and wants to improve their technique and their strength, or it's someone who's kind of hesitant and they're holding themselves back by not squatting. And I'm going to try and talk you back into squatting. And when you get back there, you're going to have better mobility, better technique, and you're going to get strong fast when you follow some of these pieces of advice. So not a complete tutorial, but rather an understanding of the squat, the positioning of the bar, the setup, the technique. What are some things that we're aiming for in terms of depth? How do we know we're doing a good squat? And also for the idea of people having bad leverages for squatting. Well, regardless of whether you've got very long femurs or you're very tall, regardless, you're going to be able to improve your ability to hit depth, okay, whether that's to parallel or below on the high bar squat, just by doing some basic mobility stuff. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. So on the high bar squat, let's first address the muscles that are used and the muscles that aren't. So on the squat, what you're going to be targeting above all else, whether this is a low bar or high bar squat, in this case we're talking high bar, quads, absolutely number one development on the squat. The glutes, can't get away from that. Same thing with the adductors and the spinal erectors. So your spinal erectors are fighting to keep your back upright. Okay, they're preventing you from falling in. So they're going to be working isometrically to stabilize your spine on the squat. Now, if you have weak and underdeveloped spinal erectors relative to your quads, that might cause you to feel a little bit uncomfortable. It may affect your ability to stay upright on the squat. So if you're someone who spent your time developing your legs doing like weighted lunges or like goblet squats and leg presses and basically using alternatives to the squat, one of the downstream effects of not training a squat or a deadlift, especially a deadlift, is having weak spinal erectors, which will come back to bite you later on, especially if you try and get strong using a squat, because then you'll have a disconnect between your quads and your back, and that's not very helpful if you're trying to squat. The adductor, we're not going to get too galaxy brain about the adductors as a group of muscles. There's more than one, and there's one in particular that works hard on a squat. It basically goes from here all the way to your sit-down bone, and in order to work the adductor in particular, the adductor magnus, in order to work this one, you have to get your hip up into flexion and out into abduction into a stretched position. So basically you squat down, you open up your knees, and then as you're standing up, it's going to bring those knees together and it's going to extend those hips. So it's sort of in that position, acting kind of like a hamstring. That leads us into the myths. So two muscles that have this mythical status of being used on the squat. First of all, the abs, and then secondly, the hamstrings. So because your hamstrings are in a shortened and lengthened position, there's not really a length change throughout the squat, whether it's high bar, low bar, front squat. So typically you're not getting a ton of hamstring work on any squat variation, but especially on a high bar or front squat where it's a little more vertical. So because you're bending your knee and flexing the hip, you're both stretching and shortening, and you're not really getting a lot of work. But with the adductor magnus, it doesn't cross your knee. And because of that, when you get it up into this stretch position, it's acting like a hamstring. The abs, this one's a great myth. But you can think about it like this. The abs and the spinal erectors, they're each other's antagonist. So if the erectors are working, then the antagonist is the abs. And the same is true in reverse if you're doing like crunches or something like that, a plank. The antagonist would be the spinal erectors. So if someone gives you a cue to really crunch with your abs and tighten down on a squat,
breathe out and tighten down. Contract your abs forcefully.
What they're telling you to do is counterproductive because you don't want spinal flexion. You're trying to stay upright underneath that weight. You don't want to squeeze hard with your abs. Now, it is true if you take a big breath on a squat and you brace and you stay tight, you push out with your abdomen. You take a big breath into your stomach and you feel like that. You try and trap it like closing a valve to keep the air in. Yeah, you will have some core activation, but the most important activation for stability there is, again, on your back, not with your abs. And you're only going to get any abdominal contraction if you take that big breath. So those ones are a myth. The abs, hamstrings, they're not really growing from squats. Now, bar position. As far as the setup goes for high bar, typically I'd recommend right on the upper traps, even if you don't have very meaty traps, and you want to basically retract your shoulder blades in order to get it. So on your walk up, you want to make sure you get into a position where you're retracting your shoulder blades and you're digging the bar in, like so. And you can see a clip of me doing that. Ideally, long-term especially, don't use the sissy pad. Okay, this is going to cause the bar to be in a little bit different of position, and it's going to change the mechanics of the squat. So I'd rather see you spend most of your time developing your strength, just doing it right on your shirt, your sweater, your skin, okay, directly on your muscles. It's going to be uncomfortable at first, but the pain from squatting without a pad is going to go away over time. It's not going to take long for your body to get used to it. And if you start early on, when you're weaker, it won't be so bad because the weight you're using is lighter. Again, going back to the walk up for the bar position, you want to have a nice smooth walk up. So typically recommend people think about their grip width. You want to be outside your shoulder width. You can go thumbs on top of the bar or under the bar, whatever your preference is. And when you get underneath, okay, before you get underneath, I want you to bring the bar to your chest, bring your feet under the bar, rock back, get underneath, get tight, retract your shoulder blades, and then wiggle around your stance to see if you feel good to push up. Okay, you should be setting the bar height somewhere below your shoulders. It shouldn't be up here. You shouldn't have to tiptoe, but you also shouldn't have to fully squat to get the bar on your back in the first place. So having a smooth walk up and a good bar height is going to help you have a good bar position, and having a correct bar position is going to allow you to work the right muscles. Some people don't squat low bar or high bar. They're kind of in between. That might work for a certain person's build, but I think it's more commonly beneficial to pick one or the other. In this case, we're talking about high bar. Most people will be built just fine for a high bar squat. The goal on this exercise is to get deep, although not necessarily as deep as possible. You'll hear the term ATG, right? Getting your butt all the way down to the ground. You don't have to get your butt all the way to the ground to get the benefits of doing a high bar squat. But ideally, I'd love to see you in a position like this. Long term on the squat, getting your hips below your knees. That would be ideal for hypertrophy and for strength development, because when you go deeper on the squat, you're going to be working different heads of your quads throughout different phases of the strength curve. Particularly your vastus medialis isn't going to get worked quite as hard if you're not going as deep. So something like a quarter squat or a leg press, unless it's ATG, isn't going to work your inner quad very much, so hitting depth is very important. Now, there's a couple things we need to consider before we get deep. Number one, the first consideration is going to be keeping the spine neutral. So if you've heard of butt wink, that is a real concern, particularly on the high bar squat, I would think. And what that basically means is that you're going to hit a depth where, in order to compensate for a lack of mobility in your knees, hips, and ankles, what your body does is it creates movement where it can't necessarily be created somewhere else. So you'll see someone go down in a certain position, they're not used to squatting, and their lower back rounds out. That's not ideal on a squat. Okay, that's going to greatly increase the wear and tear on your joints. We want to be as gentle on our spine as possible. So when someone says straight back or keep your back flat, they're not literally implying that your spine is straight, but rather you see this natural S-curve, right? Okay, so here's the front, here's the back, here's your sacrum. This is the lumbar curve that goes inward, and this is the thoracic curve that goes outward. We want to maintain that position, and neutral spine means your back's going to look flat to the naked eye. So when you're coming down, we want to see you get as deep as possible while having as minimal outward curvature like this. We want to minimize this as you get your hips below your knees. That's not going to be possible on day one for everyone, but it will be possible for many people as they work to improve their mobility. Okay, so we want to minimize that butt wink for the sake of our back. Number 2, we want to get the knees over the toes. If you don't get your knees over the toes on the squat, it's going to be really difficult to get significant work done, right? Look at this guy. This guy's basically doing a quarter squat, and you'll notice he's stopping with about 90 degrees angle in the joints. The irony of telling someone to stop at a 90-degree knee bend is that they're underdeveloping the musculature of their legs. So again, going back to the inner quad, it's not getting a lot of stimulus from this position. Strength isn't just about, load versus range of motion, but the reason why you have multiple muscles working together to produce one action, in the case of the quads, you have 4 different quads to produce knee extension. The reason why you have 4 is because they work throughout different planes of motion, different parts of the strength curve, depending on the line of force, and that's going to allow you to perform different movements from different angles. And one of those angles would be extension from a deep knee flexion. Let's see how we're doing on time. Pretty good. All right, so this would be the wrong position, and these two would be correct. This is about parallel. So if someone says, squat to parallel, what they mean is that your thigh bone, roughly speaking, your femur, is parallel to the floor. I would say that that's a great position, especially for someone who's really new to the squat. Getting your butt down to the parallel line or close, a little above, a little below, is going to get you a ton of work for your quads and a nice stretch in your glutes, so you get a nice glute activation. Same thing here, long term, getting your butt below your knees. Some people will call that ATG, but you know what? You can almost always push yourself a little bit deeper. It's just, are you willing to create some butt wink? Butt wink isn't completely dangerous, but it is a position your body has to get used to, and some people are going to produce more butt wink than others. So it depends. But again, this is a great position, wrong position. You can't really hit depth on a squat if you're not willing to let your knees go over your toes, and the idea that this is dangerous for your knees is complete myth. Number 3, open your knees up. This guy's doing it right. This guy's doing it wrong. So the reason why Johnny One Plate over here on the right has these knock knees, right? They're caving in. He would have started off with a bad position where his legs are too narrow, and he's probably inexperienced technically, so he's not proficient enough to keep himself open. What you want to do is, as your butt gets lower, you want your knees to spread out to avoid valgus. So that way, as you push, your legs naturally drive together. But if they start out too narrow, and you're not used to squatting narrow Olympic style, they're going to cave in, especially if your quads are weak. So you need to open up your knees while you're going down. As far as mobility practice goes, this stuff is really important. So if you're having a tough time hitting depth right now, you're going to want to do some of these drills. I guarantee if you do these for a week, it will feel at least a little bit better to squat. And if you do this for a couple weeks, maybe a month, you'd be surprised how much better it feels to squat depth high bar. So some light stretches, some things you can do would just be like to get one foot up on a bench and just get yourself into as much hip flexion as possible and try and keep your spine upright. That's a nice gentle way to stretch out your adductors and your quads. So you can do something like that. I'd also recommend that you do multiple warm-up sets on the day that you train. So 2 or 3 sets of squats, whether that's a first set of body weight, then the bar, then 135 or 95 pounds, something like that. That's going to give you some practice to just neurologically, mentally relax, as well as increase the blood flow, the temperature, and so on. So multiple warm-ups is definitely a good idea on squats. And then we're going to want to spend time at depth. Okay, spend time in the hole. So get down into a position where you're fully crouched all the way down and just let your body relax. Get into a position where your quads don't really have to work, and try and spend 30 to 60 seconds every day. You can do it in the morning, at night, before your workout, after your workout, it doesn't really matter. Okay, mobility, flexibility, it's a product of time spent in a position, which teaches your body to relax the muscles. It's not something necessarily that's like, this guy's muscles are longer than this guy's and blah, blah, blah. It's more about giving your body a reason to relax, to allow a certain muscle length to occur, right? Same reason that if you're bedridden for a long time, you're going to have a difficulty, bending down, touching your toes, because you had a period of disuse. So we want to teach that childlike flexibility, right? Children can spend time in that crouch position, playing games or playing with toys, and it's really easy for children, but we lose that mobility as adults because we're not spending time down there. You could also do 1 to 5 minutes in a squat squat position on your squat session, I definitely recommend that. You can start towards 1 minute, work your way up to 5, right? Dosage. And I get this from Zach Talander. Go check out his videos. He talks about a 5-minute squat protocol where you do 5 minutes in a squat position every time you squat. It's a great way to improve your mobility. Another one is going to be doing pause squats. They will clean up your reps like nothing else. All right, so if you get down to that bottom position, you just force yourself to hold the position for like 1 to 2 seconds. That will actually allow you to use less weight and get more out of less, and it's going to force you to use cleaner technique. Another important element is as you're going down, your spine's going to be in a fixed position. You want to be able to hit depth, keep that position with your spine, come out without this. You don't want your hips to hitch up like that. You want to maintain that position, and then as you get to the top, you're going to straighten out, not completely fully because there's a bar on your back, but it'll be like this. That's basically the mechanics of the movement with regards to the spine. Paused squats are going to make that a lot more doable. You can use a lighter weight. Let's say there's a weight you can do 8 reps. You probably could comfortably do 5, maybe 6 with a paused rep. And it could be 1, 2, 3 second pause, but at least a couple seconds will again help you clean up that technique. As far as strength work goes, I want you guys to consider using isolations to help grow your quads. One of the biggest reasons why people struggle hitting depth and maintaining verticality is because they have weak quads. So if you do some stuff like leg extensions, weighted wall sits, some hack squats, belt squats, those aren't all necessarily isolations, but they're good accessories and secondaries to grow your quads, which usually are one of the limiting factors on having a quality bar path on the squat. As far as intensity goes, RP 6 to 9 is great, and it has to be a true RP, so you can't just say it's RP 8 and have like 10 in reserve, okay? Be honest with yourself, push yourself. And I would say even a sweet spot would be 7 or 8. You really should never do a set of squats to failure, in my opinion, completely unnecessary. And as far as rep ranges go, spend some of your time doing doubles and triples, especially at least like 1 set for every session. And the bulk of your volume should be 5 to 12 rep range. That's my opinion. Some people will say other things. That's not to say that a set of 20 isn't effective. It's just that I view this as being a nice balance between hypertrophy and strength. So spend most of your time in the 5 to 12 range on your high bar squat. As far as volume goes, 6 to 10 sets, every week is plenty. You don't need to blast yourself with 15 to 20 sets of squats. And this is true, if you're doing it 3 times a week, 3 working sets on each of those days is plenty. And if you're doing just 2 days a week, well, 3 or 4 sessions on each of those days is also probably plenty. You don't necessarily need to do 5 or 6. Otherwise, that's pretty much all I got. But the takeaway message is this. The squat is a skill. Okay, it's going to be uncomfortable at first, and it's going to stay a little bit uncomfortable for a while. But if you spend time in that position, you get used to that technique, you put in the effort and the commitment to get something out of this, you will. It's one of the best quad hypertrophy exercises there is. It will get you strong like nothing else. So don't be black-pilled about your ability to squat. It can and will improve if you put in the time. So I hope you guys enjoyed this little brief lecture, this little squat talk, and I'll see you in the next one.